Hi, everybody. My name is Olivia, and I'm the South County Prevention Coordinator here at Domestic Violence Services of Snohomish County. Super excited to be talking with you all, even though this is a pre-recorded video. Hopefully you're going to watch it and learn a bunch of cool stuff, and we'll have an interesting conversation, even though it's virtual. Please do share this widely with anyone who you might think could benefit from the information. I would love for this to get seen by as many people as possible. Totally understand that schedules are packed. And so we thought that we would record this one just so that people could have some flexibility in terms of when they decided to watch it. So again, my name is Olivia. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today. And so we are going to be talking about college relationships today, talking about college in general and just the phenomenon of forming relationships with other people. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I am a recent college grad. I graduated less than a year ago. So this will be a bit less formal than some of my other webinars have been. If you've been on the DVS YouTube, which I assume that you're on right now, if you're watching this, you might have seen some of our other webinars. So today I'll be chatting and bringing in some more personal examples, and also just definitely want to say that, of course, every university or college is different, and every college experience is different, right? And today we're going to be talking about some overarching themes that hopefully will help you navigate some of the feelings that you might have during that time, whether you're at a big state school or a small liberal arts college or a community college or anything else. So maybe some of you are here because you're going to college, you have a plan, you know what you're doing. Maybe some of you are thinking about it, kind of considering, sniffing out the options. And also maybe some of you are just here because you're curious. Any of those is awesome, and anything else is also awesome. Really just as long as you're here, that's super great. So super excited to talk, and definitely just wanted to acknowledge that there is no one experience. That's kind of the point. But hopefully we'll touch on some common themes today moving forward. So without further ado, I'm going to start to jump in here. So typically in my webinars, I tend to have a little bit firmer of an agenda. Usually it is kind of a 5 or 6 sections I really want to touch on. They're a little bit more structured. Today's a little bit different. So I am going to be breaking it into roughly 2 kinds of sections. And I'm just terming them, for the sake of the webinar, facts and feelings. So those are just some fun names that I came up with. This already gets muddy, of course, because feelings are realities. So feelings are facts. That's a whole other conversation. But in general, if we're looking over here at the facts side of things, we're generally going to be looking at the more situational circumstances around college in particular. So these are things about college, aspects of college, that lend to a very specific conversation about relationships in that space. And then we'll also go over a little bit relationships and development at this stage in your life. And then over here on the right in the feeling section, we're going to talk about the more internal experiences that you might have during this time in your life. So some of the feels, some of the thoughts you might be experiencing, and hopefully getting a sense of these common experiences will help you prepare to go into that space and to go into your college experience, whatever that might end up looking like for you. So jumping right into our first fact, or our first just sort of situational circumstance here, you can see that I have proximity, and as I like to call it, living near everyone you've ever known, seen, or heard of. So of course, this is an exaggeration for the most part, but I do think that proximity is a really, really important aspect of college to touch on when we are talking about relationships. Oftentimes in your first year of college particularly, but also oftentimes throughout the experience, you might be living in a dorm. So in a building with roommates, with a bunch of people literally steps away from you. And even if you aren't living in a dorm, you are usually on a campus of some kind. And again, even if that is a big campus, even if it's maybe a city campus, it's a bit more sprawling, there is this effect regardless. So something that tends to happen is that all these different parts of your life, whether that be the classes that you're in, maybe the gym, maybe the dining halls or restaurants, or the library or other places where you like to study or do work. These all tend to roughly cycle through a very similar group of people, typically the people that are going to school with you. And this is pretty unique to the college experience. It almost has a sort of small town feel. So some of you might be thinking, hearing this, very understandably so, heck yeah, this sounds awesome, right? And I totally agree. This was definitely one of my favorite parts of being in college, was having people around. It was super fun, super exciting. It can be really, really fun to have friends or even acquaintances be potentially around you at all times. It can also be fun to know people from a lot of different areas. I know it was always really cool for me if I was out or if I was, in a class with someone, just to be able to be like, oh, I've seen you before. You're on the basketball team, or like, I've seen you in this area. You're friends with this other person I know. That's just kind of a fun feeling. And then I know that for some people as well, it can just feel nice. It can feel comforting to always be surrounded by people in that way, even if you don't necessarily know them super closely. I know that for some people, that's a really comforting feeling. And then also it can feel really, maybe not easy, but convenient to find environments where you might make friends or where you might find like-minded people or other people to do things with. So there are some really, really big upsides to this proximity aspect. And of course, like everything that has an upside, there's also some things that might be a little bit less ideal. One of these things is scrutiny. So in these situations where there are so many people packed in, so many people kind of milling around doing their thing, but also being aware of everyone else, there becomes this thing, this effect where all of your actions, and then by extension, everyone else's actions, tend to feel like they're kind of under a microscope sometimes. So you might be doing things and thinking, who's hanging out with who? I can kind of see what's going on. I can see the dynamics. Who am I hanging out with? Am I hanging out with enough people or keeping busy enough? These are some feelings that we'll get to in a little bit. It can also be tough to avoid people that you might not want to see for whatever reason. And again, particularly maybe on a smaller campus, even if you don't necessarily cross this person's path per se, you might run into a situation where one of your friends knows someone else who's friends with this person, and then maybe you'll feel a little bit hesitant or uncomfortable going into certain situations when you know that those connections are there. So that awareness of those connections can absolutely have some effects on the relationships that you're forming. And then also here you can see that I have loneliness with some question marks by it, because I think that typically you wouldn't think of seeing proximity and loneliness in the same slide. But I think that it's really, really important to note that in this situation where there are so many people around, that actually doesn't necessarily mean that you'll never feel lonely. And in fact, in that situation where everyone's around and yet you still don't maybe feel connected to the people, you're just kind of seeing them there, that loneliness feeling can actually be amplified. It can feel really hard to be surrounded by people and yet not really feel that closeness. Some of you might have heard the expression like water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, right? A little bit like that. It might lend to some of those feelings of, well, there's people everywhere, but like, I don't really feel super connected. Like, am I doing something wrong? When of course it's not a moral failing on anyone's part, it's just really tough to make a bunch of new connections in a new place. So we'll get to some of these feelings later on. And of course, this, like everything else that I'm going to say in this presentation, is not to scare you or to put you off, but to tell you that it's just absolutely normal and that some of these things are circumstances of being in a college space. So the next one that I'm going to touch on is Newfound Independence. This one is pretty straightforward. It's something that a lot of you maybe are thinking about when you're thinking about college. Can be super exciting. For a lot of people, college is the first time that they are leaving home. It's the first time they're moving away, maybe from the house they grew up in or the people who raised them or whatever it might be. And so oftentimes, with the exception of maybe boarding schools or summer programs, I know that some people went to maybe boarding schools for high school, in which case you might have a little bit more experience living on your own. But in any case, whether you go to college 10 minutes down the road from where you grew up, or whether you go to college across the country or even across the world, one of the biggest changes that happens there is this distance. And again, I don't even necessarily just mean that geographic distance, but also that psychological distance, that developmental distance from a lot of those rules or customs or just habits that you might have grown up with. Maybe your family or your household had rules around when you could and couldn't hang out with your friends or who you could and couldn't hang out with. Maybe they had rules around if you could date or who you could date. These rules also may have absolutely existed at things like boarding schools or other long-term programs as well. And then when you're going into college, you really do have that agency. You have that agency about who you hang out with, when you hang out with them, what you do. And so this can be super exciting to have this freedom. It can lend to a lot of eagerness to try new things. It's really exciting. It can also be totally overwhelming, right? It's like, oh my God, all of a sudden I have all this choice. And so that can absolutely impact the relationships and the potential for relationships that you might be forming. So the next little fact I'm going to talk about is multiple commitments. This one's not necessarily unique to college, I don't think. I imagine that lots of you watching this probably have or had a lot of different commitments throughout high school or whatever it might have been. But I do think it's worth mentioning here because in college, I really do see this fact section as a function of those other things that I've talked about so far. So of that proximity to so many different people and things and opportunities, and also a function of that newfound independence that you're gaining, right? No one is, I guess people really wouldn't be making your schedule for you in high school most likely, but still you don't have anyone saying you need to be home at this time and you need to have your homework done before you do this other thing. And then you have this commitment. Again, you have that agency. And so this is a very interesting and unique context in which to form and maintain relationships when you're going away to a new place, because you're likely going to be juggling a lot of practical commitments like these ones you see here on the left. You might be focusing on your classes and your homework. You might have a job on or off campus. Maybe you're dealing with money and scholarships to be at school, particularly after your first year of college. Oftentimes, you might be figuring out your own housing, maybe for the first time. You might also be figuring out how to feed yourself, whether that be budgeting a meal plan that you might be getting, or whether that actually looks like going to the grocery store, shopping, and then cooking your own meals, maybe later in your college career. And of course, all the other commitments that you have outside of school and work and stuff, clubs, volunteering, extracurriculars, all of that stuff that, again, I imagine a lot of you had experience with in high school as well. And then, of course, you have those more social, emotional commitments that you have. Making friends, right? That's a little bit more nebulous than like going to the store. But it's a mindset. It's going to be in your brain, taking up space, going to parties, going to hangouts, maybe forming or maintaining romantic relationships, even keeping those weak ties, those acquaintances, maybe like some kid you sit next to in your philosophy class, you see them every day and like, oh, how was your evening? How was your weekend, right? That still takes up that energy and that space in your brain. Budgeting time for alone time, self-care, super important. Maybe you're keeping up with people from home, right? Maybe you call your family once a week or your best friend from home or whatever it might be. And then, of course, also creating the space to try new activities, do things that are exciting to you. I just listed so many different things that you have the potential to be juggling, and I'm sure I missed a whole lot too. And so just having this all on your plate, it can be a really, really unique context in which to also really be focusing on making new friends and maybe dating new people while you're in college, because you also have so much other stuff going on in your brain. So another feature of college is that it can bring together lots of different people. Now, of course, the disclaimer here is that generally college itself is already a far narrower sample than the world in general. College can absolutely come with a lot of privilege. And of course, at the end of the day, it is a choice. Not everyone aspires to go to college necessarily. It is generally pretty self-selecting sample. especially when you do get to looking at maybe those more selective, oftentimes more expensive, smaller, maybe liberal arts schools. That is often where we do tend to see a lot of that privilege play out, particularly in that wealth gap as well. But regardless, even in those spaces, there are these ways that people that you'll encounter might be different from you. And just like anywhere, you'll be building relationships in a place where there could be either a lot more difference or a lot less difference than you're used to. I know that in my experience, I went to a really big, pretty diverse public high school right in the middle of the city. And then I went to a really small liberal arts college, and those were very different experiences. It was definitely kind of a shock going from one of those environments to the next one. And I think it definitely did impact how I formed relationships with people, what I was used to, what I was coming into, and what everyone around me was like, right? And so forming these relationships in this context, it might be exciting, it might be frustrating, it might be confusing, or any number of other things. But I do think that it can be really, really fun to meet people from different regions of the country or even of the world, meet people with different views. Even if they're not your best friend, it can just be really, really interesting to see where everyone's coming from. And I think that was a really big part of my relationship forming when I was in college is, okay, like I'm getting to know you. And unlike in high school where it was more likely going to be like, okay, I generally know you're from around here and we both go to this school and we may have even gone to similar elementary or middle schools, right? There's just so much to learn about the people generally that you're coming into college with, which can be really exciting. All right, so I have this section just because I think it's kind of fun and interesting. I like to look at, or I was interested in looking at how college relationships as sort of a phenomenon have changed and evolved over time. So I found that back in the old days, you know, in like the 70s and 80s, I think my parents were in the college in like mid to late 80s. So even before their time, the pattern of college dating was generally this pattern of casually dating multiple people, but there was no necessary implication of a relationship in any of those cases. Dating those people, that word dating didn't carry that implication of we're in a relationship. And I think over time, that word dating has come to generally mean being in a more decidedly exclusive relationship with that person, right? If I'm dating this person, I'm generally going to use that to mean I'm committed to them, we're in a relationship, whatever that might be. Of course, you can also go on dates without being a couple who is dating, right? So of course it can get confusing, and maybe these have all changed. Maybe I'm super old and have no idea what I'm talking about. So that's also totally a possibility. But I also think that it is really interesting to note that people approach relationships differently, and that's okay. Some people are interested in maybe those more casual dating flings. Maybe some people are more interested in the hookup scene, not really super interested in committed relationships. Maybe some people are a little bit more interested in that long-term future planning, maybe marriage as a goal type of relationship. And of course, these are all totally fine. None of these is better than the other. The important thing is that they are communicated about. What's huge is when you are going into a relationship with someone, just being upfront, even if you don't know exactly what all of your goals are in a 5-year plan, that's totally okay. But being as upfront as you feel comfortable being with this other person about what you're feeling, what you're bringing into this. Because I think so often people assume that everyone else kind of knows and that it's an assumed thing, but really, I say all this to show that nothing's static. Clearly, things change over time, culture changes, and everyone has different preferences. Relationships are not set in stone. That's part of the process of building a relationship, is that you and the other person get to decide what that relationship looks like. And so hopefully that's done, and hopefully after watching this especially, that's done in a way that's healthy, it's communicative, it's open. All right, moving on. Portrayal, of course, had to put this in here. Over time, movies and shows and all other kinds of media have generally portrayed college because why wouldn't you? Kind of fun. They've portrayed college and everything about it, from relationships to classes to accomplishments to mishaps, in all different kinds of ways. And these different kinds of ways are not all good or bad. But as you can see here, right, whether they're classic movies from before all of our times, I'm assuming, or maybe more recent TV shows, all of these can definitely work to set up an expectation, even if that expectation is subconscious or unconscious. I think that it's worth noting that you will likely go into college with some kind of preconceived notion of what that experience might look like. And again, that's not a positive or negative thing. I just think it is good to be aware of the preconceived ideas that we might be holding when we're going into a new experience. So that wraps up the kind of facts section. And again, I really don't like to be thinking of it as splitting it super black and white, but we're going to transition now into moving away from some of those more tangible things, right? Like you're literally leaving home, or you are literally around all these people, or you've maybe seen movies with this thing happening in it. We're going to be talking a little bit more about some of those feelings you might be having, thought processes, again, just emotions that can come with this time of your life and in this space, some of those more internal experiences that are super, super, super important to talk about. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I really do wish that I had had this conversation before I went to college. So the first one we're going to talk about is this idea of turning a new leaf, or this expression goes by a bazillion other names, right? Blank slate, starting fresh, new year, new me, right? The old Olivia is dead. She can't come to the phone right now. Whatever it might be, I really do like to think of this as a pretty distinctly entering college type of mindset. And that's not to say this mindset can't be used in other places, but I do think that it is used in this space in a very unique way. So something that I think tends to happen when people leave home, they go away to college, it's a new chapter in their lives, they tend to think that they're not taking anything with them. And there's almost this idea of you're becoming this new person when you go away to college, right? And that idea isn't inherently bad. There's nothing wrong with that. As I'll talk about later, it can absolutely be a great way to think. But I do think it's super, super important to note that you actually carry with you all kinds of things. When you go to college, you're not just an infant alien who's never experienced the world. You actually have perspectives and experiences and a whole life up till this point that you are carrying with you to some extent. You might be carrying with you the way that you've learned to relate to other people for your entire, whatever, 17, 18 years. Maybe most recently, the way you've learned to relate to people in high school. And so I think that this mindset can be really great, whimsical, fun. It can also be a little bit problematic because so many people want to do this thing of starting anew when they get to college. It can be a little bit complicated because something that's super, super important when entering a relationship, whether that's a friendship or a romantic relationship or anything else, something that's super important is knowing yourself. And of course, I don't mean like knowing every single thing about yourself and having your whole life figured out, because who does that? Not me. And no one really does that, right? But having this acknowledgement that you have your experiences, you have your perspectives, and just knowing yourself in that way, super important when you're entering a relationship. It allows us to know what we want. And once we know that, we can communicate that to other people. And hopefully then we can treat people with more respect because, again, we have that basic knowledge of ourselves and we have that basic respect and dignity for ourselves. We're not trying to create these relationships in the shell of this entirely new person. And another thing that I think is worth mentioning is that this phenomenon that typically you see a lot of in high school of maybe social capital or social stratification, maybe different cliques or groups or whatever it might be, that's not going to completely evaporate when you go to college. And of course, it might look different. It might feel more sophisticated than in high school. It's a very different environment, of course. And of course, the ultimate goal is working toward an environment where there isn't stratification. Everyone is friends with everyone and everyone treats everyone with respect. That is absolutely the goal. But I just say this to maybe take some of that pressure off and just remember that typically when you're entering college, the only thing between you and high school is usually like a couple of months. And so again, just not having that expectation that overnight you're just going to totally change, become this perfect, mature person who's like ready to face the world. And again, this does not by any means mean that you can't try new things, that you can't work on things that you want to improve about yourself, because you absolutely can and you should. And college is a great opportunity for that. But again, I just want to kind of put this seed in your mind that you aren't going to become a new person. It's not possible. You are the person, you are you, and you have your past experiences, and that's okay. So just setting that expectation that in one way or another, you're going to carry your old self, quote unquote, with you. You absolutely have all the room in the world to grow and change and improve, but that those things from your past, those perspectives, those experiences, those might stay with you, and that's perfectly okay and perfectly normal. So another kind of what I like to think of as entering college mindset is this idea that you're entering adulthood or that you're entering the real world. So these are some loaded statements, and I think it's interesting to think about how that's technically not even necessarily true. Your brain's not done developing until you're 25, blah, blah, blah. My brain's not even done developing yet, right? There's all the technicalities. But also this statement can put a lot of pressure on you, as we'll discuss shortly. And of course, it might be true in a lot of ways. Like we talked about, maybe it's your first time living on your own or doing some of those other newfound independence things that we already discussed. But still, that phrase, the real world, can also mean so many different things. It can look different for lots of different people. It's a pretty nebulous phrase. And also, as we've already talked about, college is pretty unique. And it's not always necessarily going to be this perfect mirror to the rest of the world. And so I would love for you to pause, take a second, think about how this might affect your relationships, how this mindset might affect the relationships that you are forming, that you're maintaining when you're entering college. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds just to jot down some quick ideas. I really hope you all are going to do it. And then we'll come back and we'll talk. Awesome. So hopefully you all took really, really diligent notes on your thoughts, and you're just staring at your beautiful piece of paper where you wrote it all down. I'm sure that's exactly what happened. But just in case it didn't, we can talk through a couple of things that at least come to my mind when I think about how this mindset might affect the relationships that you might be forming when you're coming into this new space. So you might be feeling this pressure to, I mean, if people are telling you this is where you're entering adulthood, pretty simply, you might be feeling pressure to act like an adult, whatever that means or looks like, right? Maybe you'll feel some pressure to have serious relationships, again, whatever that might mean for you, or to make things last for a certain amount of time or a longer amount of time. You might be comparing the experiences that you're having to those in high school. And again, that distance really isn't very much. So these are some ways that this mindset might affect the relationships that you're forming. But again, I would love if you all could also think about this, because I think it's a really good thing to bounce around in your head before you go off into your full adult life, into the real world. And so speaking of this pressure, I think this is a huge one. you might have, again, seen in like movies or shows, or maybe you've been told by other people. I know that when I was going to college, a lot of like my parents' friends who went to college, they were super sweet, very, very supportive, very excited, and really eager to tell me all about their college experiences. You know, they were reminiscing on the good old days. And I got a lot of stories, and some of the vibes that I picked up on were that college is where you make your best friends, right? It's where you make all these memories that are going to last you a lifetime. And again, that can be really great to hear, really exciting. It was great to have those people kind of hyping me up. It also can create some pressure, whether that's, very direct, or maybe you internalize it a little bit. It can create that pressure, right? Imagine walking into your first day of orientation and seeing a bazillion people and thinking, okay, you have like Uncle Bob's voice in the back of your mind, like, this is where you make your memories that will last you forever. Like, all right, here we go, right? And so I think this can be potentially stressful for someone who thinks of themselves as a little bit more introverted, maybe less eager to go start a conversation or introduce themselves to someone else. But I also do think that even if you're someone who thinks of yourself as a social person, as a very well-connected person, this environment with this pressure can almost create almost like a testing ground. Like, okay, here we go. I'm a social person. Like, here's 1,000 new people, time to prove it and make 1,000 new friends, right? That's a whole lot on your brain and on your heart. And in thinking about how this pressure might be affecting your relationships, right? In the situation, you might be rushing into things. You might not evaluate things, relationships, other people, your connection to other people, the way that you might evaluate them if you were feeling less rushed, if you were feeling less pressure. It also might create this effect of making you feel like the people that you befriend immediately, right? Whether that's your dorm people, whether that's your orientation group, making you feel like those people are your only options, like you're just immediately bonded to them. And of course, this can have positive consequences, right? It's definitely a bonding experience. It's good to know. You'll probably find some friends right from then. But it can also create that kind of pressure, and it also might lead you into some relationships that if you had more time and peace and calm, you might think, like this, I might not be getting from this what I actually want to be, right? So I know that some of my best friends now are friends that I made early in college, but also some of my best friends now are people that I didn't become close with until more than a year into the whole thing. And then, of course, there are friends that I had at the beginning that I don't talk to anymore. And that's okay. That's not because they're terrible people, but it's just because it became more clear through the course of the years that we weren't going to be close for a number of different reasons. And so with that, I think it's also important to remember that generally speaking, it's 4 years, which is a really long time for relationships to evolve and develop, much less you within your own person and your own brain. You're also evolving and developing. So of course, those relationships might change. Sorry, that little delay there. But here we are at the age-old question, what is everyone doing? I would wager that at least one time in your life, you've asked yourself this question. I would even go as far as to wager that in high school, this is a question that was on your mind a lot. I know it was for me, for sure. This is a question that is common to the human experience, right? What's everyone up to? What is everyone doing, right? I think especially in college, it can feel like a really important question, especially when, again, everyone's kind of always around, or at least you perceive that they are. So it can be a little bit of a slippery slope. It can be easy to feel socially inadequate if you don't have plans, or if you don't know who you'll be eating your next meal with. I know that in my experience at the school that I went to, the college that I went to, all of the classes typically got out at noon, which was really fun in a lot of ways because everyone was roughly on a pretty similar schedule. But it also did mean that right at lunchtime, everyone was just pouring out of their classes, and it was kind of this mad dash who am I eating with? Where am I eating? What am I eating? What's my plan? Do I need to have a plan before I go to class so that I can have a plan right when I leave and don't have to spend my time figuring it out? Right? That can be kind of a lot. Or maybe, maybe you don't know if you're going to go out on a given night. You're kind of waiting around, waiting to see if the group message gets active, right? So this can put your relationships with people in a very interesting space. What can happen here is that these people that maybe you're friends with, maybe you're acquaintances with, they can almost evolve into becoming your social lifelines, to put it really dramatically, rather than just your friends. And again, this can have benefits and consequences. Some friendships in college can be, and romantic relationships and any other kinds of relationships, can be really intense and good. And they can also be really wrapped up with a lot of this anxiety. And I also think it's worth noting that in adolescence, so when you're, 14 to 17, roughly high school age-ish, you are going to be, or you have been, super attuned to social evaluation. So basically what everyone else is thinking. And that can either be perceived social evaluation. So maybe it's a bit more in your head, like I feel like this person might be thinking about me. Sometimes it can be factual though. Sometimes people are judging. What can you do, right? And obviously the being perceptive to social evaluation is not limited to teens by any means. We all, as human beings, have some perception, as we should, of what others are thinking of us. And this actually helps us. It helps us to be functioning human beings, to contribute to society, to be kind to each other. But in adolescence, it is to such a high degree because your brain is learning that what you do matters, right? When you're a little kid, you're just running around, you're not really thinking about it that much. And so when you're entering college, you're typically coming off of this time. If you're entering college around 17, 18, you've had probably a lot of years under your belt of thinking like this, and you might be coming off of it. But again, that transition isn't going to happen overnight. And so it's likely that when you're forming relationships in college, you're also probably going to be thinking at least a little bit about what everyone else is thinking of them. So maybe you are starting to date someone, you're seeing them. You might also be thinking, what's my friend group thinking? And if you feel like you have a lot of support for that relationship, it can be super exciting, right? There's no better feeling in the world. Like everything's working out, feels really charged, it's really exciting. And if not, if you feel like that support might be a little bit rockier, that can be really stressful as well. And then I also think that social media can absolutely play a big role in these feelings. And this is not me sitting here and saying, stay off social media, kids. Like, definitely not, right? We all use it to some extent, and it can have some huge benefits as well. Check out the social media webinar that's also on our YouTube if you want to see more about this. But just really quickly, I think that in this specific situation, I know that when I was a first year in college, my first couple of weeks, my friends and I, the people that I immediately kind of connected with, we downloaded this app called Life 360. And I don't know if it's still a thing that people use, but it was this app that was basically a super intense location tracking app. You could form a group with a bunch of people, see everyone's location, what times they came and went. You could even see, I think, their phone battery percentage. I would not recommend. It started out really fun and it quickly escalated to a very, very anxiety-inducing situation. And I also remember that when I was in college, Snapchat was still huge. So similar vibes there, right? What is everyone doing? What's everyone up to? I'm going to check Snap Maps. So just, again, this isn't me saying don't use social media. It's just me saying, please take care of yourself. And yeah, evaluate if the social media that you're using is making you happy and making you feel connected, or if it's making you feel inadequate and lonely, because you don't deserve to feel those things. All right, so we've gone through some feelings, some thought processes, some internal experiences, and how they might impact the relationships that you might be forming when you go to college. I do want to take a closer look at friendships and at romantic relationships in particular. So we'll start here with friendships. And of course, you can see here I have a very simple should and shouldn't list. And of course, life isn't this easy. Life is not a T-chart, but I think that these are some really good starting places and just things to remember. So in general, the friends that you make in college and in your life, but again, we are focusing specifically on this space. Friends that you're making here should be people that you are genuinely happy to be around. That's a really big one. It might sound really simple. Maybe some of you, hopefully some of you have some really close friends now from high school or from childhood or whatever it might be that you're like, yeah, obviously I'm happy to be around them, right? But again, with all this stuff we've been talking about, with that pressure, with that social evaluation, with these new independent spaces, it can be something that you lose sight of. So I think it's really important to just remember that when you're finding friends, when you're finding people to spend your time with and share your activities with, they should be people that generally you feel happy when you're with them, and hopefully vice versa. They feel happy when they're around you. They should be treating you with respect. Full stop. There is no excuse for any kind of different treatment than that. They should be listening to you and supporting you, right? Of course, this doesn't mean that they're there at every beck and call. It doesn't mean that they should become a dumping ground for everything that you want to share, right? Boundaries, super, super important. Could do another 2-hour webinar on that, but we don't have time for that. But in general, your friends should be people that will listen to you and they'll support you and they'll be there for you. They should be people that you feel safe going out with. This is a huge one, especially in college, in party culture, maybe bars when you're of age, of course. The friends that you go out with, they should be people that you feel you can count on if you're in an unsafe situation. If you need help, you can turn to them. You can say, I want to go home. Will you walk me home? I need help dealing with this person. That trust and safety is super, super important. They should be consistent. They should be, again, this doesn't mean just completely unconditional. They'll drop everything for you. That's not an expectation that's realistic, but they should be consistent in how they're there for you and how they, again, support you, help you out. And they should be celebrating your successes, right? Sharing your good days, all that good stuff. And then over here on the shouldn't side, your college friends should not make you anxious. Again, they should make you happy, safe, fulfilled. They shouldn't be taking advantage of you. They should be wanting to be your friends because you're you and you're awesome, not because of optics or because of convenience or any of those other things. They should not disregard your feelings. If you're coming to them with something, they should take it seriously. And with that, they shouldn't make you feel nervous to come to them. They shouldn't be utilizing your support that you might be giving them as a friend and then not returning the act, right? Your friendships and relationships shouldn't be one-sided. You should be able to expect support back in return for the support that you're giving, again, within reasonable boundaries and all of that good stuff. Your friends shouldn't be keeping you guessing, right? It shouldn't be this big game of cat and mouse, like, oh, one day my group of friends wants to get lunch with me, but then the next day they're all going out without me. You don't have to accept that. You really, really don't. And those kinds of friendships, they don't pay off in the long run. The ones that do are the ones that are, again, consistent and kind and respectful. And of course, your friends should not be putting you down. There is literally no excuse for backhanded compliments, for straight up snarky, rude comments in the name of like a joke or something funny. If it doesn't feel funny to you, then full stop, it's not funny. So I'm going to take a look now at romantic relationships. Again, should and shouldn't, very simple. But over here on the left, we're thinking about how your partner should be someone you feel safe with. This is so important, especially in college, when you are going to be likely entering a lot of different spaces, a lot of new spaces, a lot of new experiences. It's really important is if you're starting a relationship with someone, you should feel safe with them in any context. They should treat you with respect and kindness. Again, that's the expectation, no excuses. They should communicate openly and be open to communication from you. This is a huge one. Again, especially in college, when you are probably going to be entering a lot of new experiences, new spaces. It is literally of the utmost importance that your partner is willing to talk about it, to talk about things that you're trying together, talk about new things, whether those are sexual, intimate experiences, whether they're other things, just going out, doing something new together. They should be open to talking to you about it. They should celebrate your independence. This is a huge one, I think, especially on these college campuses where, again, that proximity can be a huge factor here. You have the right to your own life in college, even if you meet someone during orientation and you start dating them right away and they're great and you get along great. You deserve time to yourself. You deserve time with your friends separately from them. You deserve time to work on your homework and do your extracurriculars and do things outside of the relationship. And they should absolutely be not only respecting that independence of yours, but actively celebrating it. A partner who is supportive is one who actively celebrates and encourages their partner to pursue activities outside of the relationship as well. Your partner should validate your concerns and feelings. Again, if there's anything we've learned from this entire conversation, it's that you're gonna have a lot of feelings during this time. You just are. You're gonna have feelings, you're gonna have concerns, there are gonna be things that go wrong, there are gonna be issues. And you want your partner to be someone that, again, not you dump everything on with no boundaries, but that they're someone that you can go to when you're feeling something and you can talk about it. Again, that open communication. And of course, they should make you feel good about yourself. Pretty straightforward as well. Your partner shouldn't make you nervous to raise concerns with them. This is a huge one. There's a lot going on when you're entering college. Again, there's a lot of social dynamics. There's friend groups. There's that stratification. There's other activities. Regardless of how busy things get and how stressful it might be, your partner should not be making you feel crazy, should be making you feel stupid or silly for raising things that are important to you with them. They should absolutely not be putting you down. Again, not backhanded, not as a joke. It's never, ever, ever okay. They shouldn't keep you guessing. If you're in a relationship with someone, you shouldn't have to be constantly anxious about the state of your relationship, about the nature of your relationship. They shouldn't be reluctant to have that conversation with you if that's a conversation that you want to have. They shouldn't be controlling you or monitoring your activities. That's a huge one. Again, with that independence, you have the right to do what you want to do. Controlling behavior is never okay in a relationship. And of course, they should absolutely not be pressuring you to do anything you don't want to do. Again, whether this is a sexual experience, an intimate experience, whether it's something else, whether it's substances, drinking, drugs, anything else, or just any other experience, hanging out with someone that you don't want to hang out with. Your partner is not in control of you and you are not in control of them. They have no right to pressure or coerce you into doing anything. This is a really big topic, something that I wish I knew in college, and I think is just a really important way to encapsulate all of this, is that extreme anxiety is not a normal part of a relationship. Extreme anxiety is not a healthy part of a relationship, and that doesn't show that the relationship is healthy. Of course, a little bit of stress every now and then, totally normal, right? We all get anxious. We all have social situations and things go wrong and things happen. Totally normal, right? But if you are constantly feeling nervous, stressed, if you're feeling these huge up and downs in your relationship, you don't have to feel like that. Healthy relationships feel consistent, they feel safe. So in summary, just some phrases that, if you take nothing else from today, I think it's really helpful to remember these. This "how would I feel if" statement is a really helpful one. Again, for just remembering, treating people with respect. I know we all learned this in kindergarten, the golden rule, but again, it can be a lot easier to lose sight of than you think, especially given all these contexts that I've spent 45 minutes going over. So another one, communicate, communicate, communicate. Can't say this enough. College might be a lot of firsts, whether it's with a romantic partner or a good friend. Talk about it. Talk about what you both want out of a given situation. Your conversations don't have to be beautiful, polished presentations, they might be a little bit hard, and that's okay. Communication is really important. Again, as long as it is healthy and kind and respectful. Make space for your whole self, not just you in college. Right? Understand that you don't need to reinvent yourself overnight just because you're at college, just because you left home. You should feel comfortable celebrating or at least acknowledging all parts of yourself, bringing your experiences, bringing your perspectives, and finding people who will do the same with you. Taking the pressure and expectations with a grain of salt, right? If nothing else, just being aware that they probably exist somewhere deep down in your brain and thinking, okay, if this doesn't look like Animal House, it's fine, it's fine. College can look a lot of different ways, right? In the midst of all the chaos, finding people who will genuinely make you excited to see them, who will make you feel good about yourself. And again, not just because of the optics of hanging out with them, but because you genuinely enjoy it. Super important. Also, time to yourself. I totally skipped that one, but that's really, really important as well. Again, especially in that context of proximity and of that comparison, anxiety, what's everyone doing mindset. It is so not only normal and okay, but actually really healthy to take a second for yourself and just say, I can take a 30-minute nap right now. I can just go on a walk by myself. I can go study in the library alone. I don't need to have 5 friends come to the library with me, right? Totally, totally okay. Very healthy. And of course, in college, as always, you are the only one who gets to decide what happens to your body. You are the only one. It doesn't matter if you're at a party. It doesn't matter what you're wearing. It doesn't matter how you're acting. You are the only one. Your experiences matter. Your voice matters, always. And if you are coerced or forced to do something you're uncomfortable with, it is not your fault. It is never your fault. So here I do have some resources. Even if you don't think you'll ever need it, just take a picture, save this somehow. Someone you know or care about might need it. Worst case, takes up a tiny bit of phone storage in your camera roll, right? So we have here the hotline for us, for DVS, the National Teen Dating Abuse Hotline, National Sexual Assault Hotline, and website called loveisrespect.org, specifically for young people and talking about healthy relationships and a bunch of good stuff. And here are some sources that I used in this presentation. Feel free to check any of this out. It's a lot of articles and big, lengthy paragraphs, but if you're interested, feel free to look at it. So I believe that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much again for watching. I really appreciate it. And again, please, please, please share this with anyone that you know or can send it to. Even if they're not sure if they're going to college, just send it to them anyway. I would love, again, for this to meet as many eyes and ears as possible. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.